The 1980s were an exciting time for car enthusiasts, especially those who loved rally racing. During this era, one car stood out from the crowd: the Mazda 323 GTX. This little-known gem was produced between 1986 and 1989, and it has a fascinating story that deserves to be told. The Mazda 323 GTX wasn't just another ordinary compact car. It was a homologation special, which means it was built to meet the requirements for Group A rally competition. Mazda, the Japanese automaker, wanted to show off their engineering skills through motorsports, and the 323 GTX was their ticket to enter the World Rally Championship, also known as WRC. Let's start by talking about the car's rally heritage. The Mazda 323 GTX was born out of the need to satisfy Group A rally regulations. These rules required car manufacturers to produce a certain number of road-going versions of their rally cars. Mazda took this challenge seriously, and in 1985, they introduced the rally version of the 323 GTX in Japan and Europe. From the very beginning, the 323 GTX showed great potential on tough rally stages, but it wasn't until 1987 that the car really made its mark. In that year, the Mazda 323 GTX became the first Japanese car to win the Rally Sweden. This was a big deal because the Rally Sweden is known for its harsh, icy conditions that many other rally cars struggled with. The 323 GTX's victory proved that it was a serious contender in the world of rally racing. Seeing the success of their rally car, Mazda decided to bring a version of the 323 GTX to everyday drivers in the United States. In 1988, they introduced the production version of the 323 GTX to the American market. This car was designed to give regular people a taste of what it felt like to drive a rally car on public roads. The US version of the GTX came with many features that made it feel like a genuine rally car. Under the hood, it had a 1.6-liter turbocharged engine. This was the same basic engine block used in the race cars, but it was tuned down for street use. While the race versions could produce nearly 250 horsepower, the street versions still packed a respectable 132 horsepower. One of the most impressive features of the 323 GTX was its all-wheel drive system. This system, combined with a locking center differential, made the car incredibly capable in rough terrain and slippery conditions. Whether you were driving on wet roads or gravel paths, the 323 GTX could handle it all, just like its rally counterparts. Now, let's talk about the design and features of the Mazda 323 GTX. At first glance, you might mistake it for a regular Mazda 323, which was known as the Familia in Japan, but a closer look would reveal the rally-inspired features that made it special. The body of the GTX was strengthened to handle the abuse of rally stages. It also had a wider track than the standard 323, which improved its cornering abilities. The suspension was upgraded too, using components that could take more punishment than a regular street car. Inside the 323 GTX, you'd find some nice creature comforts. It came with Recaro bucket seats, which were quite fancy for a compact car in the late 1980s. Some models even had an optional digital dashboard, which was very high-tech for its time. And let's not forget the sunroof, which added a touch of luxury to this rally-bred machine. But the real magic of the 323 GTX was in its mechanical bits. The turbocharged 16-valve 1.6-liter engine was a marvel of engineering. It was based on the engine used in the Mazda Miata, but with a turbocharger added for extra power. The engine block was made of cast iron, which made it very durable, perfect for the demanding conditions of rally racing. The all-wheel drive system of the 323 GTX deserves special mention. It was designed to perform well both on regular roads and rally stages. The system featured a lockable center differential that split the power evenly between the front and rear wheels. This setup, combined with the car's 5-speed manual transmission, gave the 323 GTX excellent traction and handling in all sorts of driving conditions. However, like any car, the GTX wasn't without its problems. One of the biggest issues was with the transmission. Many owners found that the gearbox couldn't handle repeated hard launches, especially if the engine had been modified for more power. The all-wheel drive system, while effective, made transmission repairs more complicated and time-consuming. The brakes were another weak point of the 323 GTX. The front brake rotors were mounted in a way that made them difficult to service or replace. Some owners even resorted to swapping the brakes for parts from other cars, like the Ford Escort or Mazda Miata, to make maintenance easier. Despite these challenges, the Mazda 323 GTX remains a special car in automotive history. One of the things that makes it so unique is its rarity. Mazda only sold the GTX in the United States for 2 years, 1988 and 1989. During that time, fewer than 1,300 cars were imported. To be exact, only about 1,243 323 GTXs made it to American shores. The short production run of the GTX was likely due to a few factors. For one, it was an expensive car for its time. In 1988, a new 323 GTX would cost you around $13,000, which was a lot of money for a compact car back then. Additionally, the American market wasn't quite ready for a rally-inspired hot hatchback. While the car had a dedicated group of fans, it didn't have the same broad appeal as other Japanese performance cars of the era, like the Nissan 300ZX or Toyota Supra. Today, the Mazda 323 GTX is a cult favorite among rally enthusiasts and collectors. Its rarity, combined with its rally pedigree and capable all-wheel drive system, has helped it maintain a strong following despite its age. Many owners still use their 323 GTXs in rallycross events and vintage racing, where the car's ability to handle rough terrain and twisty roads really shines. The story of the Mitsubishi Colt GTI is one of automotive ingenuity and the pursuit of driving excitement. In the late 1980s, as hot hatches were taking the European car market by storm, Mitsubishi threw its hat into the ring with a compact powerhouse that would leave its mark on automotive history. The year was 1988, and the streets were buzzing with the sound of small, nimble cars that packed a surprising punch. Volkswagen had already made waves with its Golf GTI, and Peugeot was turning heads with the 205 GTI. But Mitsubishi, a Japanese automaker known for its reliability and innovation, wasn't content to sit on the sidelines. They had a vision: to create a car that could hang with the best of them while carrying the banner of Japanese engineering excellence. Enter the Mitsubishi Colt GTI, a car that would become the crown jewel of the third-generation Colt lineup, also known as the C50 series. This wasn't just another compact car, it was Mitsubishi's declaration that they could compete in the high-stakes world of performance hatchbacks. The Colt GTI was designed to appeal to a specific type of driver, someone who needed the practicality of a daily driver but craved the thrill of a sports car. The Colt GTI, with its compact dimensions, 167.1 inches long, 65.7 inches wide, and standing proud at 55.3 inches tall, the Colt GTI was the perfect urban warrior. Its wheelbase of 96.7 inches gave it the stability of a much larger car, while its modest ground clearance of 6.1 inches meant it could hug the road like a race car without sacrificing everyday usability. But the Colt GTI wasn't just about looks. Under the hood lurked the heart of a true performer. The early models from 1988 to 1990 boasted a 1.6-liter DOHC 16-valve inline-4 engine known by its code name 4G61. This powerplant was a marvel of engineering, churning out a respectable 124 horsepower at 6,500 revolutions per minute and 107 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 revolutions per minute. For a car weighing just over 2,200 pounds, this meant spirited performance that could put a smile on any driver's face. Mitsubishi wasn't content to rest on its laurels, though. In 1990, they upped the ante by introducing a more powerful 1.8-liter DOHC engine, designated as the 4G67. This beefier motor pushed the output to 136 horsepower and 119 pound-feet of torque, giving the Colt GTI even more grunt. With this new heart, the little hatchback could sprint from 0 to 62 miles per hour in around 9 seconds and reach a top speed of about 124 miles per hour. The Colt GTI's performance wasn't just about straight-line speed, though. Mitsubishi's engineers had crafted a car that could dance through corners with the grace of a ballet dancer and the aggression of a boxer. The front suspension used McPherson struts with coil springs, a setup that provided both comfort and precision. At the rear, a torsion beam axle with coil springs struck a balance between handling prowess and everyday usability. Drivers of the Colt GTI found themselves with a car that seemed to anticipate their every move. The power-assisted rack and pinion steering offered feedback that made the car feel like an extension of the driver's will. With a tight turning circle of just 32.2 feet, the Colt GTI could navigate city streets and winding country roads with equal aplomb. But a true performance car needs more than just speed. It needs to be able to stop on a dime. Mitsubishi didn't skimp here, equipping the Colt GTI with ventilated disc brakes up front and solid discs at the rear. This braking system, with its dual circuit setup and vacuum servo, ensured that the car could shed speed as quickly as it built it up. Step inside the Colt GTI, and you'd find an interior that was all business. This wasn't a luxury car, and it didn't pretend to be. Instead, it offered a driver-focused cockpit that put everything within easy reach. The seats, with their extra bolstering, held driver and passengers firmly in place during spirited driving. The dashboard, with its clear gauges and essential tachometer, provided all the information a performance driver needed without unnecessary clutter. Sure, you'd find some creature comforts, manual air conditioning to keep you cool, power windows for convenience, and a basic radio cassette player for your favorite driving tunes. But the Colt GTI wasn't about frills, it was about the pure joy of driving. As the years went by, the Mitsubishi Colt GTI carved out its own niche in the hot hatch market. It may not have achieved the iconic status of some of its European rivals, but for those in the know, it represented something special. Here was a car that combined Japanese reliability with European-style performance, a marriage of East and West that pointed to the future of global car manufacturing. This small but mighty hatchback took the rally world by storm in the early 1980s, proving that sometimes the underdog can come out on top. Our story begins in the mid-1970s. The British car industry was going through tough times. Chrysler UK, which used to be called the Roots Group, was struggling to make money. They needed a way to get people excited about their cars again. So in 1977, they came up with a new small car called the Chrysler Sunbeam. The Sunbeam was built on a shortened version of another car's base, the Hillman Avenger. It was rear-wheel drive, which means the engine power goes to the back wheels. At first, you could get it with small engines, 928cc, 1.3 liter, or 1.6 liter, but these weren't very powerful, and Chrysler wanted to do better. You see, at that time, rally racing was a big deal. Cars like the Ford Escort RS and Renault 5 Turbo were winning all the races. Chrysler wanted a piece of that action. They knew they needed help to make their little Sunbeam into a real rally car. That's where Lotus comes in. Lotus was a British company famous for making fast sports cars. In 1978, Chrysler asked Lotus to help them turn the Sunbeam into a rally champion. Lotus said yes, and they got to work. The engineers at Lotus made big changes to the Sunbeam. They took out the old 1.6-liter engine and put in a much more powerful 2.2-liter engine. This wasn't just any engine, it was a special Lotus design with 16 valves. They also added a new 5-speed gearbox made by a company called ZF, but Lotus didn't stop there. They made the suspension stiffer, added thicker anti-roll bars, and put in a limited slip differential. All of these changes were meant to make the car handle better on rally stages. The new car was shown to the public for the first time in April 1979 at the Geneva Motor Show. People were impressed, and Chrysler started making them right away. They needed to build a certain number of these cars for regular people to buy before they could use them in rallies. This is called homologation. Now, let's talk about what made this car special. The Talbot Sunbeam Lotus that you could buy for the road had that 2.2-liter engine we mentioned. It could make 150 horsepower. That might not sound like much today, but back then it was a lot, especially for such a light car. The Sunbeam Lotus only weighed about 2,050 pounds. All that power in a light car meant it was fast. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 7.3 seconds. Its top speed was about 122 miles per hour. The engine used something called Delorto carburetors to mix fuel and air. It also had a special exhaust system that made it sound really cool. Inside the car, things were pretty simple. There were bucket seats to hold you in place during fast driving. The steering wheel had 3 spokes and the dashboard was basic. It had a tachometer to show engine speed and just a few other controls. There weren't many fancy features, but that helped keep the car light and fast. The Talbot Sunbeam Lotus hit the rally stages in 1979, but it was in 1980 that people really started to notice it. A young Finnish driver named Henri Toivonen won a big rally called the Lombard RAC Rally in a Sunbeam Lotus. He was only 24 years old, making him the youngest driver ever to win a World Rally Championship event at that time. The next year, 1981, was when the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus really shined. It was up against some tough competition. There was the Audi Quattro, which had a new all-wheel drive system. The Ford Escort RS 1800 was still a strong competitor too, but the Sunbeam Lotus had something special. It was reliable and performed well on all kinds of rally stages. A French driver named Guy Frequelin and his co-driver Jean Tott, who later became an important person in motorsports, drove the Sunbeam Lotus to many good finishes that year. They didn't always win, but they finished near the top a lot. All of these good results added up, and at the end of the 1981 season, Talbot won the World Rally Championship Manufacturer's title. This was a big deal. Talbot was a small team from Britain and France, and they had beaten much bigger teams with more money. It proved that sometimes having a simple, well-designed car can beat more advanced technology. The rally versions of the Sunbeam Lotus were even more powerful than the road cars. They could make up to 250 horsepower. This extra power, combined with the car's light weight and good handling, made it very competitive. Even though other teams were starting to use all-wheel drive, the rear-wheel drive Sunbeam Lotus could still keep up. You could usually spot a Talbot Sunbeam Lotus on the road. The first ones were painted black with silver stripes on the sides. They had Lotus badges to show they were special. Later on, you could get them in other colors, like Moonstone Blue. They had 13-inch alloy wheels with Pirelli Cinturato tires. There was a spoiler on the back to help with aerodynamics, and 4 extra lights on the front for night driving and rallies. Talbot only made about 2,300 Sunbeam Lotus cars between 1979 and 1981. That's not very many, but the car left a big mark on rally history and car enthusiasts. People loved it because it was light, had rear-wheel drive, and that powerful Lotus engine. It was a car that skilled drivers could really enjoy. The story of the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus shows us that sometimes a small team with a good idea can beat the big guys. It wasn't the most advanced car, but it was well designed, and in the hands of skilled drivers, it could beat almost anything. Even today, many years later, people still remember and admire the little Sunbeam Lotus that took on the rally world and won.